We'll get started. Just welcome everyone. It's so great to be back on the Long Island Women in Tech recordings. So we haven't done a WebEx type style webinar in a few months now. I know we've done a lot of our meetups in person. So it's been great to see all of you, but it's really also great to expand our group to people who may not be able to join us after hours and meet face to face. So I thank Tanis for joining us today as our presenter, and I'll get into her bio in a minute. But again, just introducing myself, in case you don't know me, I'm Stefana Muller, and I'm the founder of Long Island Women in Tech. All right, so one thing I wanted to bring up before we get started is that Long Island Women in Tech has a new website, new mission, and a focus. So I welcome you all to go to liwomenintech.com and check out the website and go to the About Us page and learn more about what we are doing on Long Island to bring more women into technology roles and get people to stay here in our local area. I also brought on board a bunch of women who are really awesome and are helping me organize Long Island Women in Tech, which brings more and more events. If you have noticed, we've had 3 or 4 events each month now, which is great. And it's all due to the participation of these women that you see on the screen now. Shauna Breland is handling all of our social media. Samantha Seymour is doing a lot of the events and organizing new speakers for us. Brooke and Kerry are stepping up to spread the word about our organization as well and helping us with branding. So it's great to have a new group and a new website and a new mission. So this is the splash for 2017 that I mentioned earlier in the year, and I hope you all have taken a look at the things that we've been putting together. All right, so another thing, just so that you know what we do, we've expanded a lot of the goals that we had at Long Island Women in Tech this year. We're working on a full networking of our members, mentoring programs, truly education programs outside of just career building, but also technology education. We provide career support, resume reviews, guidance for members who are just getting into the field. We are also giving a lot back to our local community by volunteering at local schools, libraries, and colleges. We also are fostering a safe space for you to try something new. You can always reach out to me or any of our directors and ask them for advice and how do you test out a new idea. All right, enough of my advertising of our group. By now we should have everyone on the phone. I would love to introduce you to Tanis Cornell, and this is actually the first time she and I are speaking on the phone, but she comes at high recommendation from one of my contacts through Long Island Women in Tech. Tanis is the owner of the Dallas EWF International, and she leads and facilitates peer advisory forums for women business owners. She is also the founder of her own consulting firm, TJC Consulting, and she offers personalized assessments and leadership development, coaching, and so on. Tanis comes to us with years of experience in the industry, in tech, in business. She's on boards of many organizations and gives back to her local community as well. I welcome Tanis. Thank you so much for volunteering your time here with Long Island Women in Tech, and I really appreciate you getting on the phone with us today.
Well, I'm delighted that you invited me, Stefana, so thank you.
So, Tanis, I just handed you presenter, so I'll let you go and teach us something new today. Thank you.
All right, so before I get started, I'm looking for the little arrow. Hang on here. Bear with me as I figure out how to advance the slides.
That's okay. Do you hear me?
I do.
At the top of your screen, there should be an arrow with 2 arrows at the top. If not, I can advance the slides for you.
I see no arrows. Okay.
Why don't we scroll to the top and see if you see a 01?
No, I just see a little chat, mute, annotate, share. Well, bear with me. Let me get out of full screen and maybe
that's
all right.
right.
Here, we'll just do it this way. Yeah, I think I found it. There we go.
Perfect.
There we go.
It's
Sorry
always
for the
a
technical
new
difficulties.
meeting. It's always a new meeting system. I use about 5 of them a week. It's crazy.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Well, thank you for inviting me. And what I really want to address today is just I called this presentation Navigating the River of Career Success. And if any of you have read the book by Sheryl Sandberg called Lean In, she talks about the fact that a career isn't always a ladder. Sometimes it's a jungle gym and you have to go sideways. And I kind of liken a career to a river, actually, where, there are days when you're in the calm water and everything is peaceful and it looks great, but perhaps it's not particularly exciting, but it's comfortable. Then you have those times when you're headed down the rapids. And oftentimes when we look back in our career, we go, you know what, when it was fast-paced and moving fast, that's when it was challenging, but it was also when we were learning the most. And when we look back, we go, those were really fun times because they were exciting. Then you have those times in your career where you just feel like you're rowing upstream, and that no matter what you do, you can't make any progress. And then occasionally you get stuck on the sandbar. And you're just stuck and you can't figure out, where do I go from here? And then every once in a while, you head over the waterfall. And these may be the big mistakes that you make in your career. Maybe you get fired for something. Maybe there's a layoff. But those are those big moments. Having been in the business for as long as I have had a few of those moments in my career, but you recover from those moments and you learn from those moments. And they propel you forward to the next stage of your career. So I kind of want to talk about navigating those things today, but the first thing I want to do is just share a few statistics with you and about why we care about getting more women in tech and more women into leadership positions. Almost 50% of the workforce is women, not as much, it's more like 35% in technology companies. But over half of the college degrees go to women, 60% of graduate degrees go to women, and half of PhDs go to women. And yet, what we find, and Catalyst does a lot of this research, is that our representation in the senior ranks of business declines the farther up the traditional career ladder that you go. And only 4% of the CEOs of Fortune 500 companies are women. And so we look at these statistics and we go, well, why should we care? And why do we care? Well, there's several reasons that we need to care. And I do have a question. Can you see the entire, is this showing the entire slide or just the title?
Sorry, it's showing the entire slide. We can see
great.
Everything.
Well, when I'm in presentation mode, it goes one by one, but it didn't look like that, so that's what I wanted to know. Thanks. So there are several reasons we care. The reality is that public companies with 3 or more women on their board outperform public companies that do not have that female representation. Fortune Magazine did a 12-year study, and I like it because it took place over a long period of time. And they did a study where they took 80 companies that had women CEOs and compared them against the performance of the S&P 500. And during those 12 years, those companies produced equity returns of 226% better than the S&P 500. That is staggering. Now, does that mean that every one of those 80 women CEOs outperformed the S&P 500? No. But as an average, the performance was significantly better. Credit Suisse did a research study that took place globally with executives at 3,000 companies, 40 countries, and what they found is that the performance for companies that had women in more than 10% of their key positions was 27% better than those who had less than 5%, and a much higher dividend payout. So there's study after study that validates this information. And it's part of the reasons why companies should care, because it's a good business decision when you have more women in leadership positions. And what's interesting now is that the investment firms are actually developing investment strategies around companies that are led by women or have greater women representation, because they've seen the correlation in financial performance results. And so the conclusion is that teams that have more balanced gender diversity in leadership positions drive better financial performance. So that should give us confidence as women that we have a lot to offer the companies that we work for, and that by offering our expertise, we help them to perform better financially. So we look at that and we go, so okay, that's great, but how do we bridge the gap, and how do we get more women in senior leadership positions? And so I don't have all the answers. And I mean, I'm sure if you do any reading on the subject at all, there's a lot of articles that are written about this subject. But there are several things that when I talk to women, I talk about that I think can contribute to our success as we manage our careers and we rise through the ranks of our organizations. The first one is to build our own personal leadership competencies. And those leadership competencies are not just around technical capabilities. They're around leadership competencies, and I'm going to talk about some of those specifically. We need to build awareness and strategies around personality risk factors that we may have as individuals. The reality is we all have strengths and weaknesses. We all have leadership risk behaviors, and the first step towards managing that is to have self-insight and understand what our own strengths and abilities are and how we mitigate those risk strategies that we have. And then building the soft skills that really differentiate us from the other crowd of people. You know, career success requires a blend of things. It requires you to be competent. It requires you to deliver results. It requires certain behaviors that allow you to get along with others and to be successful in your organization. And then there are perceptions of you that are external to you that also are big factors in your ability to be successful in your career. If you have not seen it, I would encourage each of you, male or female, to watch the TED Talk by Susan Colantuono. It's called something, I think the title of it is The Career Advice You Probably Never Got. And what she talks about in that TED Talk is the fact that so much of the career advice that women get is directed towards the soft skills of, having more confidence and learning to speak up and all those things that are very important, but that we don't spend a lot of time around the competencies that have us get there. And the reality is the competencies that we develop and the business, strategic, and financial acumen that we develop is kind of the baseline that is the first consideration for accelerating your career. And then all of those personal soft skills are the things that differentiate you from the crowd. And she talks about mentorship in this TED Talk, and she gives a great example of a CEO that was really proud of himself because he had two protégés, one male and one female. And after talking with her, he realized, he said, you know what? When I have been mentoring my female protégé, I've been talking to her about things like having more confidence and how to speak up and, professional presence and all of those things, and I've been teaching the guy the business. And he said it suddenly struck me how I was treating them differently as men and as women. So it's a very interesting TED Talk, and I would encourage you to look at it because she talks about the entry to success is having business, financial, and strategic acumen. So when I hear that, I think, what does that mean to have strategic, financial, and business acumen? And oftentimes when people are in tech jobs, you're a software engineer, you're a developer, you're in IT in some way. You may not always think about the financial acumen you need to have a broader perspective in running the business and helping the business grow. So it's really key for women to understand the financials of their department and their company What are the metrics and the leading indicators that you need to be watching, and how does your role specifically and your department play into the financial health of the company? It's very important to have that strategic acumen. Can you read a balance sheet and an income statement? Do you understand financial terms that the senior executives of your company are using? Do you know how your department and your role contributes and impacts those key financial metrics? And can you discuss those metrics and utilize words and phrases that show you have that financial acumen? And when you are engaging with other executives and people in the organization, can you use those words in those conversations that help them understand you have that financial acumen? And around business acumen, do you understand how your company makes money? Do you understand the key objectives that your company has? And can you help them understand the relevant options available to them to set an appropriate course of action and develop an implementation plan to get the job done? Do you show that you have the business skills and business acumen to move the company forward that goes beyond the technical skills that you bring to the job? And non-financial metrics count in this business acumen as well. Do you understand things like innovation, quality of management, customer satisfaction, where the market position of your company is and where they can take advantage of opportunities in the market, brand image, management credibility, all of those non-financial metrics that count towards business acumen? And then do you have strategic acumen? What are the opportunities for the company? What are the risks that the company is facing from the outside world and the competition? And what strategies can you help the company put in place to combat those outside forces? And those three levels of acumen are going to lend itself to you being understood as a leader and someone who can help move the company forward. IDG has come out with what they call 9 leadership competencies for high-growth companies. And when we're in tech, we know that tech typically in most tech industry is high growth. Technology is constantly changing, and there is tremendous opportunity within technology. But because tech is changing so quickly, there's a constant need for change in the technology community. And so they talk about 9 leadership competencies that are really essential for leaders in high-growth companies, and these really apply to technology companies. The first is change leadership. Are you a person that can help transform and align your department and in embracing the kind of change that needs to take place to move the company forward? We all know that we tend to be creatures of habit. Most people do not love change, but it's something that if we do not embrace it and if we don't learn how to manage it, it will be difficult for us to rise to senior leader positions because it's a critical skill and a critical competency for leaders. Collaboration and influence, being able to work cross-functionally with other leaders in the organization to drive positive impact. This is an area that women are typically pretty astute in doing. It's a skill that for a lot of us comes very naturally. Women do tend to have this collaborative nature a little more so than men. Not that men don't collaborate, they certainly do. But this tends to be an innate skill of many women. And this is a skill that we can use and a leadership competency that we can use that's really necessary in helping move our companies forward. The competency of commercial orientation. Are we people that can help identify opportunities for our company and seize a chance for the company to increase profit and revenue? And I'll give you an example in my own career of seeing this happen in an organization that I worked for. I spent 6 years of my corporate career with a tech company called NetApp. Many of you will be familiar. They are a data management company. They manufacture data storage systems and data software and management software. And several years ago, one of the sales engineers in the organization, in his interaction with many customers, started talking across the company. He said, you know what, folks, we're going to really be impacted by a lot of the open source software. As I'm talking to customers, more and more of them are talking to me about open source, and this is going to be a threat to our livelihood if we don't understand how to embrace this technology and the fact that many people are going to open source instead of purchasing products which require high software license fees. And when he first started talking, nobody really listened to him much. They really didn't recognize what was going on. But as time passed and he continued to talk, he suddenly became the go-to guy for people when they began to see open source threats in their customers. And he wound up leading an entire team to help NetApp determine how they could embrace open source and how they could take actually advantage of opportunities that open source might provide the company, and what could they do as a company to embrace that so that it didn't become a threat. And so it was a great example of how someone recognized a commercial orientation that was going on in his world and becoming a leader within the organization through understanding and taking a leadership position in that commercial orientation. People and organizational development is a huge competency needed for high-growth companies. And this is something different than just leading your own team. This is something that is more organizational in nature. It's, how do you develop people's careers? How do you develop people's competencies? How do you plan for succession planning? And what are the competencies necessary to do that as people leave the company, retire, et cetera? So a huge competency that's necessary. How do you understand how gender and diversity and different age groups impact the performance of your company? So a competency that's highly needed for high growth. A results orientation. Many people in technology are very skilled at process, and this is a competency that many people in tech already bring to their companies. And it's a needed skill in helping the company understand how they could create new business models or transform a process to save the company money or transform a process that could potentially create a new revenue stream. These are strategic leadership competencies that are necessary for high-growth companies. A strategic orientation, and this is if you go watch the TED Talk, she talks about strategic acumen. Somebody who has strategic orientation. They can think long-term beyond their own area of expertise. They understand the business, and they're able to critically analyze and integrate the information they know and help the company develop an action-oriented plan. The guy that I talked about at NetApp helped the company develop a plan for how they would deal with the threats that open source were presenting to the company's success. Team leadership. These are people that have the ability to transition from an individual contributor to an effective team leader. And when you move into team leadership, and I have an emerging leader program that we developed to really help women transform from individual contributors to leaders, because it's a different skill set. And we've all seen those scenarios where somebody's really good at their job, so they're made a manager, and they're really ineffective at being a manager because it's a different skill set. But being able to move into that team leadership position and transition to doing through people instead of doing it yourself is a key competency that high-growth companies need. And then external customer focus. building those value-added relationships with customers and clients. And this is another competency area where I have seen women be extremely effective in building really strong relationships with clients and customers. And market knowledge, really understanding the competition and what they're doing, understanding suppliers, understanding the customer base, the regulatory environment, and how it's going to impact that company and the opportunities that that company needs to move forward with. We have all seen where the regulatory environment has completely changed an industry. I came out of many years in telecom, and there is no industry I can think of where regulatory environment changed the industry more. Financial services is another area where regulatory environment has really changed the face of the industry. So being able to understand that market knowledge and how it applies to your organization is a key competency. So when you look at those key competencies, none of us can develop huge competencies in all of those areas. But what are the 2 or 3 areas that you have a knack for, that you know you have a natural talent for, and how do you build that skill set? So that goes to your personal leadership brand. What are you known for? How are you perceived? What are your behaviors and your competencies, and what are the results that you drive for the company that develop your leadership brand and make you visible as a person that is able to take the next step in your career? When we talk about gender and leadership, one's gender really has no bearing on personality, cognition, or leadership. Women and males equally have the ability to lead. And it's really interesting because Jack Welch, a number of years ago, got in a lot of trouble when he was speaking to a bunch of women executives at a Wall Street forum when he said, the only thing that matters is performance. If you over-deliver, that's the thing that matters. Performance is it. And he got a lot of flack and feedback from the women in that group because, let's face it, as women, we know it's about more than performance. We have all experienced a certain bias or a certain environment. That bias doesn't just come from men, it also comes from women. But we know there's more to it than just how we deliver. The reality is that most women would love to just come to work, do their job, do a great job, and they are understood, and their competencies are understood, and they're automatically given promotions. But we all know that there's more involved than just being competent at our job. A lot of it is personality factors, the perception of others about us. Our success or our derailment really depends on 2 factors. One is certainly the contributions and the results that you produce for the organization, but equally and sometimes more important is the perception of you from others about your performance. And that's really about your relationship with them and how they perceive you. And I was at a symposium, a Women in Leadership symposium here in Dallas yesterday with a panel of 5 executive women from a lot of different, everything from, public, the sheriff of Dallas County was on the panel along with a number of women out of industry. And they all spoke to the fact that, perception of them is just as key to their success. And the reality is sometimes the accepted behaviors for women is much more narrow than it is for our male colleagues. And I'm going to talk about some research around that, but I heard it validated when I listened to those women speak yesterday. Perception is our reality. We perceive ourselves in a particular way, but is that always the way that others perceive us? And sometimes that is not the case. And so it's really key that we have self-insight as to how others perceive us as well. There's a company, they're based out of Houston, called CDS the CDR assessment group, and they've been studying behavioral risk factors and comparing those risk factors in men versus women and comparing the perceptions of those risk factors in men versus women for about 15 years. And they've been collecting statistics on these risk factors, and it's pretty interesting what they've found. In their world, they've identified, there are a lot of assessments on the market, but the assessment that they've developed has identified 11 behavioral risk factors for leaders. The false advocate is the person who, says one thing to you and stabs you in the back. The worrier is people that seem indecisive, that they overanalyze. The cynic, which, they're always looking at the negative instead of the positive. And most of these you'll kind of recognize they're pretty self-explanatory. The rule breaker, the perfectionist, we all kind of look at these and we go, oh, yeah, I know what that means. I've seen that. I've observed that. And their research shows that, look, we all will at times exhibit some of these behavioral risk factors. Everybody has them. Men have them. Women have them. And so they've been studying those and collecting the statistics based on their assessments for almost 15 years. And what they found a number of interesting things in the studies as they compare men versus women leaders. What they have found is that for the most part, men and women score pretty equally in these risk factors, that there's not a whole lot of difference. They did find a few exceptions, and that women do score statistically more significantly in the worrier category, meaning that sometimes we are seen as women as indecisive because we tend to be perfectionist. We want to get it right, and in our effort to get it right, we sometimes overthink, overanalyze, and delay decisions that then make us be perceived as not making decisions and being indecisive. And that's kind of what the worrier characteristic goes to. Not that men don't also exhibit this, but they exhibit it in lesser numbers than women. In rule breaker, egotist, and upstager, men exhibit more of these risk behaviors than men. There's a statistical difference enough that it is valid. It's a statistical difference, but both men and women do exhibit these behaviors as well. One of the things that we always hear about, suddenly my arrow quit working, there we go, is, when we think about a worrier, if you've read Lean In, which is, one of the kind of the first books, Sheryl Sandberg, who's the COO of Facebook, she even talks about as successful as her career has been, she's had that particular risk behavior herself, where she's doubted her own abilities, she's been less confident, she's been fearful that she's working beyond her qualifications and that it can make her indecisive at times. And so that's something that here's someone who's incredibly successful, has experienced herself and admits to it. The Confidence Code, if you've read that book, it's a great book if you have not, deals somewhat with the same scenario where they interviewed highly successful women across many, many different industries. And they said what really surprised them is that in so many of these women, even though they were incredibly successful, they expressed some version of that same feeling that they don't fully own their right to rule at the top. And they tend to be worriers. And I love the statement in the book. It says, why is it women sound less sure of ourselves when we know that we're right than men sound when they think they could be wrong? And I think we've all seen that in our own experience and in our own careers. CDR Assessment Group has done a lot of testing on this kind of thing, and they found that, risk behaviors are found among both men and women, but the perception of these risk factors between men and women is viewed very differently, and that women are judged more harshly for exhibiting the behaviors, and that both men and women hold these unconscious bias, and that we as women, we judge these behaviors in women just as harshly, sometimes more harshly, than our male counterparts do. So we are guilty as women for judging our female counterparts more harshly than men who show the same behavior. And I have a business partner, she kind of puts it this way. She said, when we see some of these behaviors in men, we just kind of say to ourselves, you know, they just don't know any better. When we see these behaviors in women, we think, well, they as women, you know, they ought to know better. And we sometimes are our own worst critics and our own worst judges. And it's an awareness that we need to build in ourselves and support other women and be less judgmental of women as well. You know, we all know that we're walking this fine line between being assertive and being aggressive. And if we step over the line, we're labeled with the B word. That's something that men don't typically have to deal with and that we as women do. And I don't have the exact answer. It's something that each woman has to kind of figure out where that line is for themselves. You know, we're punished for being too hard. Men are punished for being too soft. And it is something that we have to deal with. It's interesting when we look at these perception differences, here's what it looks like when those risk behaviors are perceived between women and men, and how often sometimes women are more harshly criticized. So if you look at worrier, which is an area where women tend to score higher than men, we're seen as afraid, fearful, indecisive, lacking courage, whereas for men, even though they exhibit it, they're not judged as harshly often for the behavior. As you see for men, when they're rule breakers, this is an area where men tend to score higher. Oftentimes they're not punished as hard as a woman might be punished. If we look at egotist or upstager, too opinionated if we're women, and as men we just say, hey, they're selling their point of view. And we know these exist, and so it becomes difficult in navigating that river of our career. These are areas where we have to step cautiously, and we have to feel our way, and we know that these are behaviors that we get judged for. One of the very interesting things in their study is that they found out that when it comes to emotionality, that there is no real statistical difference between men and women when they are expressing emotion. The difference is how it's exhibited, and then how women get judged for it. What happens is for women, you know, our passion is often seen as being emotional, and it's confused with interpersonal sensitivity, nurturing, caring, where the emotionality of male leaders is often associated with anger, impatience, and sometimes those behaviors are just kind of considered within the accepted norms for male behavior. Men are also more likely to hide emotionality and to be more stoic. A lot of it just comes in the way we are raised and socialized. And so for women, these are more difficult issues to navigate within their career. So kind of the summary is that women tend to be worriers in greater percentages than men, and when that happens, sometimes we pull ourselves out of the limelight because we may be afraid to speak up, we may be fearful of making a decision, we're overanalyzing, and so sometimes that's viewed as a lack of courage, and it can hurt our upward mobility. So this is an area that we need to be aware of, and we need to take the leap. I held an event just a couple of weeks ago here in Dallas that was basically on leadership and mentorship for women, and I had 3 executive panelists from different industries on the panel talking about, you know, mentoring the next generation of women leaders. And one of the things they all stressed is that, you know, we really do have to take the risk. If we're comfortable in our job, it's probably time to look for that stretch assignment. And if you're not having some fear along the way, then you are too comfortable in your position. And it's when we take those risks that we actually learn the most and we benefit the most from taking those risks. So we need to step out there and take those risks. So what can we do about it? Developing self-insight is really key. I work a lot with a set of assessment tools from a company called Lumina Learning. They have a set of Big 5 psychometric tools that go very deep into personality and leadership preferences. But there are many tools, and probably many of you have taken some of those assessments. But being aware of yourself your own talents and skills and your own risk behaviors is really key. A lot of people are familiar with Strength Finders, and that's a fun assessment to do in really helping people understand those strengths. We all know that if we use our strengths on a daily basis, that invigorates us, and we're typically the most confident when we're using our natural strengths. But what I have found is that our weaknesses are most often what trip us up. And so if we're not aware of those weaknesses, if we're not thinking about strategies and ways to mitigate those weaknesses, those are the things that trip us up. And it can be everything from having a mentor that helps make you aware of those things and calls you on it, to a peer, or even your own team, where you say, hey, when you see me doing this, I want you to call me on it because I want to be aware of it. So focus on your financial, your business, and your strategic acumen, and commit to developing 2 or 3 of those high-growth competencies that we talked about before. You can't focus on all 9 of them, but you can pick 2 or 3 that you can specifically develop. So identify your strongest competencies and then develop those further and seek ways to leverage those competencies to add value to the organization. Embrace political savvy. As I mentioned earlier, we all would love to just show up and do our job and automatically be promoted, and we kind of tend to think of the politics of our organizations in negative terms. But I would encourage you to reframe the word politics to relationships, because it really is about relationships that you develop. Develop stakeholder and cross-functional relationships that will help you to foster collaboration and influence across your organization. Seek special projects and assignments that give you the ability to work on a task force that would encompass people outside your own chain of command and help you to develop those relationships. It will also help you to gain broader perspective across the business. And when you have those opportunities to participate in those special projects or those stretch assignments, weave financial and business conversations into those projects and relationships, because you will then be perceived as someone with business, financial, and strategic acumen. Develop your network. In the event that I held here in Dallas 2 or 3 weeks ago, all of the panelists really stressed that you must build your network both inside and outside your own organization. The fact that Long Island Women in Tech is an organization, I'm sure, that would allow you to build a network outside just the organization that you work for. I would also encourage you to build a network out of your own industry. And as you have opportunities to meet leaders in other industries or participate in peer advisory forums or mastermind groups that bring in people from other industries, it helps to broaden your experience and your expertise and your perspective when you have those relationships outside your own organization and your own industry. When I talk to a lot of women, I always stress that you need 3 types of supporters in your career. You need mentors, sponsors, and advisors. And I define those 3 supporters differently. I define a mentor as someone who knows you well enough that they can give you really direct feedback on your behaviors. Maybe it's a boss, maybe it's a peer of your boss, or it's a peer of yourself, someone that sees how you operate on a daily basis and can help you understand, hey, these are really strengths that you have, or hey, these are areas that you really need to improve upon, and that will give you that direct feedback. And the reality is we all need that feedback. Sponsors are typically people who are at more senior levels in your organization that know you and know your results, and they'll sponsor you for special projects, and they'll sponsor you for promotions. And then advisors are people outside the political environment of your workplace, and people that can advise you that don't have any vested interest within your organization. And the level of your mentor and sponsor predicts is a predictor of your advancement. And men in general are more effective at developing those sponsor relationships at higher levels than women. And when you enter a mentor relationship, you have to really decide, what do you need to learn? What do you want those mentors to teach you? And seek out people that can help you learn what you need to know. Engage with them instead of just inviting them to have a chat. If you need to know something, engage them or ask for a meeting with them that would help you gain perspective on a specific project or something that you're specifically working on where you can ask for their expertise or advice. And that starts the conversation that may lead to a mentor or a sponsor relationship. Communicate up. Understand, it's as important to manage up as it is to manage down, and tie your accomplishment to your superior's goals and your organizational goals, because you have to be recognized for your leadership and your ability to lead others. And build your personal brand. Learn how people perceive you. Understand those skills you have and learn how to define yourself around those skills and talk about yourself for those areas in which you're really talented. And seek opportunities to engage with your customers so that you can gain insight about the marketplace and the competition. And learn to communicate with conviction. Ask for what you want. That was reinforced in both panels that I participated in recently. You have to speak up. You have to ask for feedback. Often when you ask for feedback, you will be told things that you won't be told if you don't ask, because you are giving permission to the person to tell you something that may not be positive. Now, I'm not talking about being needy, where you're constantly asking for reinforcement or what you're doing okay. But I am talking about regular conversations where you're asking for feedback on your performance and also on your personal leadership. And, we all fail. We all make mistakes. And I have found that often we as women, we just tend to obsess about it. Forgive yourself and move on and learn from those mistakes, because those mistakes are what help you to provide better leadership in the future. And before we have questions, I want to close today with the first couple of paragraphs in a book called Good Hope Road. And these paragraphs just spoke to me because I thought, this is really a good parallel to our careers. There is a moth in a cocoon outside the window. It has been there for months, twisted by the wind, dampened by the rain. It is spring, and there's a tiny hole in the head of the cocoon. A small probe pushing through, sawing back and forth, struggling to free the creature inside. This moth has labored for hours, and only now has it pushed 2 legs through the hole. Inside in the darkness, does it know why it must struggle? Somewhere in the mass of cells and neurons that make up its tiny body, is it aware that the struggle is God's way of pumping fluid into its wings? If not for the struggle, it would come into the world with a swollen body and flightless wings. It would be a creature without strength, unable to fulfill its purpose. So my hope for you is that your struggle will give you strength and that you fulfill your purpose and that you meet your professional goals. So I just appreciate the time to share some thoughts with you this morning, and if anybody has questions or comments, I would be more than happy to engage in some discussion about that.
Thank you so much, Tanis. I think we had some great side conversation and agreed a lot with the things that you were saying during the call. It was great. Just to recap a few things that kind of resonated with the group. Let me go back. We were talking about what accepted behaviors do they see a disparity in between men and women in business.
Yes.
So the one question for you is, do you see anger as an accepted behavior for men and not for women? Because that was something we agreed on in the chat, that, if you're angry or perceived as angry, it's not acceptable for a woman.
I think it's especially not acceptable. It depends on how you express that anger. a man can kind of yell or be irritated and raise his voice, and that's kind of accepted within the norm of behavior. For a woman, when she is expressing anger, we have to really watch our tone. Because if we're seen as, if our tone gets too, we tend to raise our voice and it gets louder and higher pitched at the end of that, and when that happens, then we're labeled as emotional. Mm-hmm. So I do think that women, while we can express anger, the way we express it and the tone with which we express it, it's a much more narrowly accepted area. We have to really watch it or we get mislabeled and misperceived. So I do think it exists. It isn't fair, but it is reality. And so we do have to learn to control it, how we embrace or how we exemplify it.
Great. Thanks for that insight. That definitely helps. Team on the phone, everyone who's here, you could absolutely ask a question. If you'd like to unmute your line, you can talk to the group. Alternatively, you can chat in the chat with questions. I'll give a pause for a second to see if anyone has any questions, and there was just one more thought I had based on the conversation. If we don't have questions, we can go through that. No questions for Tanis? I mean,
nobody's had an experience they want to share with the group?
Yeah.
I can share an experience or comment. I'm going back quite a number of years now, but I remember being in a conference room with 3 male peers. I was the female of them, the only. And we were working on projects and stuff, and then I was actually told by several of them that I was working too hard and too fast and to slow down. I was making everybody look bad.
Well, and and that's pretty sad, and yet fitting in is an important part of being accepted in our careers. So it's a challenge when you face situations like that.
Yeah. So I didn't change my ways, but
I understand.
I think that's a coaching moment for them.
Exactly.
Maybe my response would be, well, I'm sorry you feel that way. I think one of the things that we can do is I can show you some of the tips that I use to keep myself productive. Have a good day. Obviously, a little biting there from myself and one of my risk factors, if you would.
One of the things that came up in the panel yesterday is a couple of the women talked about how oftentimes women, we allow ourselves to be interrupted. Mm-hmm. We'll say, hey, we've got 3 points we want to make, and we'll make 1 point, and then we'll get interrupted, and that we allow that to happen. And that we have to take control in a calm tone of voice to say, please don't interrupt me. I'd like to finish my thought, and then I would welcome your input. And that, men will tend to do that, where women will just allow somebody to interrupt them and kind of take over the conversation and hijack the conversation. And that's an area where we have to be kind of cautious and we have to take control, but we have to be careful about how we do that.
Yeah, and our tone has to be...
Yes. It's kind of moderating and keeping your tone even.
It's very difficult to do, but you've done it very well in that statement. Oh, wow. Thanks, Carrie, for the statement. It's good to hear that we're not alone.
It is nice to know we're not alone.
Anyone else want to share a story? Well, we only have 2 minutes left in the call, and I'm sure everyone has to finish up their lunch hour and get back to work. Tanis, this is great. I learned a lot about how to categorize some of the things that I do that are kind of my drawbacks as well. So I know I'll take some of this back and churn it for a few days to see how I can apply it to the current job that I'm in. So I really do appreciate it personally. This content was very useful.
Well, thank you, and I appreciate being with you all, and I wish you all great success in navigating that river.
Great, thank you.
Appreciate it.
Yeah. So we went through question and answer. So this is the final thing I wanted to do before we finish up is just come back to Long Island Women in Tech and ask the group for some help. So we have this new campaign called Help a Girl Out, and the point is that we as Long Island Women in Tech are all volunteers, and we do this out of the goodness of our hearts, and of course we want to see you succeed. But we do need some help. So if you have some skills in these 3 areas, logo design, WordPress website maintenance, or the ability to spread the word to other networks about our group and the things that we offer, please reach out to us. We are, and I'll put it in the chat now, we are reachable on Gmail at liwomenintech@gmail.com. We also have our website, which is liwomenintech.com, which has a contact form as well. So logo design, WordPress, website maintenance, and more people to spread the word about our events. We really would appreciate that. Tanis, again, thank you so much for being here today and for taking the time out of your busy schedule to give us your insight. Definitely worth the while for many of us to spend our lunch hour with you.
Great. Well, thank you.
Okay, everyone, have a great day, and I hope to see you soon. We'll have our April events coming out in the next week. All right, bye, guys.
Bye.